In 2001, the U.S. medical doctor Stephen Greer staged an initiative where several hundred witnesses of high rank and high credibility came forward with what they had experienced during service. The Disclosure Project, helped by the internet and YouTube, was a formidable eye-opener to people all over the world.
So we started a project that's known as the Disclosure Project, which people can see at disclosureproject.org. Where we began to identify military and corporate and CIA intelligence officers who had personal knowledge of the classified operations dealing with this subject, and to get them to come forward with our information to disclose this publicly. Because what we felt was necessary was that the secrecy should be ended and this information disclosed so that humanity, not just one country in America, but all of humanity could make peaceful contact with these civilizations visiting us, but also would lay the foundation for these new technologies, the energy and propulsion systems that are behind these UFOs that are so mysterious. How are they flying? Well, this is understood, but they are in classified projects. So that was another objective, was to get the technologies out to the public so we could have a civilization that would get freed from the use of oil and the destruction of the environment.
There were probably 1,500 reported cases at that time.
I have over 3,000 cases now.
They estimated 100 yards from the left wing was this 100-foot disc.
And the strength of the signal was as strong as the surface contact on the water of an aircraft carrier. This contact was huge.
The size of these objects around 100 meters or greater.
So it would go from 1 o'clock, 7 or 8 miles to 6, 7 o'clock, 7 or 8 miles inside of 4 or 5 seconds. You have to be moving pretty quickly.
They could rise, just go straight up. They could do that, just seemed like instantaneous.
Once they started moving, they went straight up, for a while, and then they went zap.
Then it just sort of disappeared. It dematerialized
and left the atmosphere, just was gone. It just took off into space.
He said, "You are never to speak of this again. As far as you're concerned, this never happened.
And you never saw this, and I don't exist, and this situation never happened."
I didn't want to look at it any longer than that because I felt that my life was in jeopardy.
I am prepared to state that I have been at locations where craft of unknown origin that did not originate on the face of this planet was there. I am prepared to state that while I was there, we saw living, dead bodies of entities that were not born on this planet. I am prepared to state that we had what they referred to as interfacing with those entities. We have contact with aliens not originating from some foreign country, but from some other solar system. And I have been a party to that.
Members of the press, the American public, and people of the world. We are here today to disclose the truth about a subject that has been ridiculed and questioned, denied for at least 50 years. These are people who have been inside the CIA, NSA, NRO, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Army, all divisions of the intelligence and military community, as well as corporate witnesses, contractors to the government. I have had grown men weep who are in the Pentagon, who are members of Congress, and who have said to me, "What are we going to do?" And these are folks who have been involved in so-called black budget or covert unacknowledged projects. These unacknowledged special access projects are taking in at least $40 to $80 billion per year. And they are sitting on technologies that can change the world forever.
A lot of people talk about conspiracies over a shadow government. I'm willing to testify before Congress that these black operations do exist. I nearly became part of it.
with United Press International. Could you please address the vehicle that there was a drawing displayed of? Why would this vehicle be on display at an air show? What is the power source that you are asserting is going to be so very useful? And how can you determine that this vehicle is not something that is being developed, by a government agency?
In fact, I think that was the testimony. This is an alien reproduction vehicle, and just to be clear, this means that it is based on advanced anti-gravity and zero-point energy propulsion systems. Those are the propulsion systems. They are being manufactured by a consortium of companies that include Lockheed Martin, Northrop, SAIC, and other corporations. They do have superluminal capacity, in other words, faster than the speed of light capacity. I think Mr. McCandlish and other witnesses that he's identified could go into more of the technical physics of it. I'm just a country doctor from Virginia, I tell people. I mean, really. And but this is actually what is the reason it's called alien reproduction vehicle is that it's based on the study of extraterrestrial vehicles, but it is manufactured by human military intelligence, aerospace contracting arrangements. And this is very important. It means that we, Homo sapiens, have the ability to access this so-called zero-point field of energy, which is the ambient field of energy from which all matter and energy is fluxing, and can access that energy and generate all the power we need to run this planet without fossil fuels or pollution.
Good morning. My name is Mark McCandlish, and for the last 21 years I have worked as a conceptual artist for a variety of defense contractors. I've been involved in conceptual artwork of the production thereof for Rockwell on the X-30 program, and also on the high-step program, that's spelled HYSTP, means Hypersonic Testbed Program. During the course of my career, I've twice had a secret security clearance. In 1967, while my father was stationed at Westover Air Force Base, the headquarters for 8th Air Force Strategic Air Command, I witnessed and watched through a telescope a UFO which hovered over a nuclear weapons storage facility for approximately 10 minutes and then departed with an acceleration approaching a bullet leaving a rifle barrel. In 1988, in November, a college buddy of mine, an associate by the name of Brad Sorensen, informed me that he had personally witnessed 3 flying saucers at a very large hangar at Norton Air Force Base during the course of an air show that was held on Saturday, November 12, 1988. I subsequently called my congressman from that district. I called his office. This was Congressman George E. Brown, Jr., who at the time was the chairman of the Congressional Committee on Space Science and Advanced Technology. I naturally assumed that since this presentation that Brad talked about was for top military brass and certain congressional individuals, that his office must have coordinated this with the local Air Force Office of Public Affairs. A male staff member in Congressman Brown's office not only confirmed the exhibit, but the fact that there were 3 discs at that exhibit. These discs were hovering off the floor without any visible means of support. They were referred to as alien reproduction vehicles, also nicknamed the flux liner because they used high voltage electricity. Let's see, to keep things short, this is a diagram that I made based on a sketch that Brad Sorensen did for me in rough form shortly after he had his sighting, and subsequently cleaned that drawing up and made it much more accurate, and that's the drawing that Dr. Greer is holding there now.
The energy is extracted from the fabric of the space around us, which means it cannot be metered. That is a direct threat to the single largest industry in the world, energy. It's goodbye ExxonMobil, goodbye oil, goodbye coal, goodbye linear transmission of electricity through power lines, all that gone. Unfortunately, it's someone's $200 trillion piggy bank. The proven oil and gas and coal reserves are worth north of $200 trillion. This information coming out would completely change geopolitical power more than anything since, well, in recorded human history. And it would happen in a generation.
It's one of these currents of history that won't be denied. The truth is going to come out, and when it does, it's going to be explosive.
So once we get that out, we will go back and completely reassemble the 20th century, rewrite it in a way, and may have to go back and rewrite a significant portion of the entire last 12,000 years.
This is the greatest story in human history. And the reason it is the greatest story in human history, it is the greatest story of human history.
On the night of February 24, 1942, only 3 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, several unidentified objects were picked up on radar over the city of Los Angeles. It was believed to be another Japanese attack and resulted in an intense searchlight activity and heavy artillery fire.
Anti-aircraft guns wanted to action against unidentified aircraft in the Los Angeles area.
But the presumed enemy never fought back, and suddenly the objects disappeared without trace. During the 50s, flying saucers were reported repeatedly, also by civil and military pilots. But the UFO sightings didn't end. Going back to 1963, a command sergeant major in the U.S. Army was assigned to the supreme headquarters of Allied powers in Europe, in Paris, France, and was given the highest top-secret clearance. The story revealed to him there puts the phenomenon into a whole new perspective.
And when I arrived in the summer of 1963, my clearance was upgraded to cosmic top secret, which was then and still is today the highest level of classification in NATO. And when I arrived in the summer of '63, I learned of a study that was underway that had been initiated in 1961. Apparently, an event had occurred on the morning of 2nd February 1961 that almost triggered World War III. A large number of circular metallic discs flying in formation flew out of the Soviet sector over the Allied sector in a divided Germany, flew off to the west. They turned north over the Channel, over the English Channel, over the southern coast of England, and then they turned north and disappeared off of NATO radar over the Norwegian Sea, off the coast of Norway. Well, this incident almost triggered World War III because the Soviets, we found out, thought those objects belonged to us. And for a time we thought they might belong to the Soviets. We were to find out that they didn't belong to either of us, the Soviets or us, that It was a real story here, and they initiated a study in '61 to determine what in the world is happening here. They concluded after this 3-year study that the planet Earth and the human race apparently had been under some kind of survey or observation for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, by several extraterrestrial advanced intelligences. Now that literally, Terry, blew me out of the water.
This document, called an assessment, an evaluation of possible threat to Allied forces in Europe, was a secret NATO report on UFOs, distributed in 15 copies in the NATO system. Could that indicate that NATO at that time was fully aware of the UFO and ET presence?
The U.S. military took UFOs very, very seriously all through the Cold War and indeed beyond. We have a fair amount of evidence, documentation, military documents, intelligence documents, that show very clearly that the U.S. military encountered objects that did not seem normal, did not look normal, and had extraordinary behavior, violating sensitive airspace, again and again and again. So the question is not, do UFOs exist? The question is, who do they belong to? And indeed, guess what? This was exactly the question I discovered that U.S. military analysts asked. They were no dummies, so they knew there's only a couple of possibilities here. Question number one, back in the 40s and 50s, was, are these Soviet devices? In the context of the Cold War, that's important. You need to find out, did the Soviets come up with a revolutionary type of propulsion and so forth? Well, they looked into it, and the answer did not seem to be yes. It looked like it was a no. And indeed, that seems to be the answer today. So then question number two is this a secret project that we're doing somewhere in the bowels of the American military complex? That's a fair question. It's entirely possible. But again, it's also possible that that isn't the answer. And indeed, a lot of the evidence doesn't seem to point that way. The fact, for example, that our jet fighters were chasing these objects again and again is one thing that points to that. If it was a secret American project, why continually, year after year, scramble your own military to chase them down? So then there's a third option, and in the context of the late 1940s, it was, are they interplanetary spaceships? That was really the only other option people could think of at the time. And guess what? There were many analysts from the 1940s and all throughout the period that we can get any information on this, that yes, there were many people who argued that this was the case.
A serving police detective within the UK force in England has over the recent years gathered reports involving over 800 police officers having different UFO encounters. And here is one of the stories.
His name was Police Constable Eric Raymond, and he was a police officer in the Thames Valley Police at the time of this particular sighting. And he was in a rural location in 1979, I believe it was, and he was stood talking with two other police officers, two vehicles parked up middle of the countryside, dark, no street lights or anything, it's just very dark. And they're doing what police officers do at 3 in the morning, have a chat, have a cigarette or whatever. Suddenly in the distance they see a bright light blink on for literally a second. It's a long way off, they look, it blinks off, they don't think anything to it, they just carry on talking. 5 minutes later, this happens. And the object appears in front of them at a distance of about 400 meters, at an altitude of just 500 feet, which is very close. And they describe the object being the size of a football field, and it is shining a beam down the width of a football field across the landscape and slowly scanning the terrain. They think about going on the police radio and think, nobody's going to believe this. So they don't want the ridicule factor. So they watch for 5 minutes in all. The object is moving in total silence, and they say there are smaller objects flying silently around the larger silent object. And after 5 minutes, it goes, it doesn't go up, doesn't go left, doesn't go right. It disappears like a light bulb.
Astonishing video has also been released from Mexico. Military gun camera shots of traveling UFOs hit the news in 2004. And even more astonishing, fleets of UFOs were seen and filmed over several cities. And what about the UPAN sightings in Belgium, the Phoenix lights in Arizona, the UFO at Osaka Airport, Japan, the UFO landing in Voronezh, Russia, the ghost rockets in Sweden, the Col d'Avance sightings in France, the UFOs filmed in Milan, Italy, the UFO fleets over Peru, the UFO hovering over Chicago O'Hare Airport, seen by pilots and ground personnel, and the large UFO forcing the Shaoshan Airport in China to close for 4 hours in 2010. It goes on and on. What some of these witnesses also revealed were observations of UFOs hovering over storage sites of nuclear weapons and nuclear rocket launch sites.
The big increase in all the sightings around the world happened at the time when we began to detonate nuclear weapons. This is not an accident. And I've been told by senior intelligence officials that essentially a big red flag went up over our planet saying we were in trouble. But not only are we in trouble, but we could be a threat to others, because you combine going into space, the early stages of space travel, and the use of hydrogen bombs and nuclear weapons, and a civilization on Earth that was still very violent, as you look around the Earth even today, of course. So this is something that any enlightened or even self-interested civilization observing the Earth, which I think we've been under observation for thousands of years, would be greatly concerned.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 en la pantalla.
Numerous well-documented UFO sightings by numerous credible people. Flying saucers tracked on radar, chased by fighter pilots. Nuclear missile sites malfunctioning after UFO visitations, and even alien beings witnessed by police officers and high-ranked military personnel. Where does all this leave us?
4 major conclusions after now 52 years, 51 years of study and investigation. First, the evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words, some UFOs, some, underline it 20 times, some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Most are not. I don't care about the ones that aren't. I'm a nuclear physicist. I don't care about the isotopes that aren't fissionable. You want to build a reactor, use the one that is. Who cares about the rest? That's the first conclusion. Second, the subject of flying saucers represents a kind of cosmic Watergate. That is to say, some few people within major governments have known since at least 1947, when at least 2 crashed flying saucers were recovered with alien bodies in New Mexico, that indeed some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Notice I'm not saying everybody in government knows. That's not how you keep secrets. I worked under security for 14 years. Need to know is the important factor. The third conclusion is that none of the arguments made against the first 2 by a small group of noisy negativists, when I'm being polite, stand up under careful scrutiny. They sound great until you look at the data, and then all those anti-arguments collapse. And the fourth conclusion, because I'm such a shy, retiring kind of guy, is that this is the biggest story of the millennium. Visits to planet Earth by alien spacecraft. Successful cover-up of the best data, bodies and wreckage, for 62 years.
Extraterrestrial beings from somewhere are engaging us and this planet, and have been for at least since the mid-20th century, and possibly for as many thousands of years back as you care to go. That's a fact. That's an absolute certain fact. It's been proven many times over. Since the 40s, the governments of the world, and certainly the United States government, the industrialized governments, have been aware of this. Right? That's a fact. It's been proven. The United States, with the cooperation of most, if not all, of its allies from World War II, made a decision to embargo this fact and the acknowledgement of it, formal acknowledgement of it, from its citizens. That's a fact. Right? But they had a formidable problem, because while it's easy to decide, okay, we're not going to talk about this, we're not going to reveal this. ETs are all over the place. They're being seen, filmed, photographed, seen by pilots outside of cockpits, year after year after year. At the same time, they're trying to maintain a policy that there's nothing there to investigate. So they had a really tough job. It's easy to say we're going to build a super bomber and put everybody under oath and classify the whole program and maybe even stick it underground and build your secret bomber. That's easy, right? But this was not easy. The extraterrestrials can come and go as they pleased. They could come and contact people as they pleased, abduct them, apparently, if they wish to. And the government has to somehow maintain this false reality in the face of all that. So the truth embargo was not just a simple decision and extremely difficult to implement. The amazing thing is that they did. They put an enormous amount of money, time, and effort into this truth embargo and succeeded.
The disclosure is going to happen very soon. Now, there are very potential positive implications of that, and then there also is a dark downside to that if it's not handled with wisdom. One concern I have is that there must be great discernment exercised not just by the leadership of our governments, but also among the population in general, when suddenly our society is confronted with the fact that there are advanced cultures here and what the implications are for our interaction. And even if those who suddenly appear in our midst have only benevolent intentions and truly want only to uplift humanity and assist us at this very crucial time in our planet's history, there will be the temptation for those who are already in the material seats of power in human institutions on this planet, who will likely try to distort this opportunity to enhance and entrench their own control and material power. And all that it's a continued extension of the same ego disease of the separation mentality that has plagued humanity, ever since we learned how to say hello to each other. So we have to call for great discernment. And that means that people need to become educated. We need to understand that our source is the same.
Robert Dean has a list of credentials a mile long. He served 4 years from 1963 to 1967 at Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers, Europe, the military arm of NATO. He was an intelligence analyst with a cosmic top-secret clearance.
Well, Don, it began for me in 1963 when I was assigned to the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe. I arrived in the summer of '63 and I was assigned to the Operations Division. I was further assigned to what we call SHOC, the War Room, the Supreme Headquarters Operations Center. And at that time I was given a cosmic top-secret clearance, which was and still is the highest level of security access that NATO has. When I was assigned to the War Room, I learned that a study had been initiated in 1961, and everybody was talking about it. They were gossiping about it. And the subject was UFOs, and that intrigued me a bit. When that study was concluded in 1964 and it was published, and I was still working in the War Room at that time, I had access to this document. I had a chance to read it. And having been exposed to it, I must tell you honestly that my life has never ever quite been the same. Because I read first-hand reports, verifiable NATO military material that indicated that the UFOs were not only real, that they represented something far beyond anything I had ever imagined before. When the study was concluded in '64, they concluded that there were 4 different groups apparently coming and visiting us. Out of those 4 different groups, one group looked exactly like we do, so much so that they could sit beside you in a restaurant or in an airplane or in a theater, and you'd never know.
And that particular point bothered the military guys a lot. The point being that some of these people from somewhere could be walking up and down the corridors of SHAPE headquarters, or they could be walking up and down the corridors of the Pentagon. One day at lunch, a lieutenant colonel made the remark, he says, "Jesus, do you realize they could even be in the White House?" And there was a little forced laughter at that point, I remember, because a lot of us over the years have had some misgivings about the occupants of the White House. But the point I'm making is that the idea that aliens could be here in our midst bothered the military, because if you're not paranoid when you go into the service, you're certainly trained very quickly to be so. It's the nature of the military mind, I think, to be paranoid. But that was only part of the story. The SHAPE conclusions in '64 were that there were 4 groups that we knew of. They were apparently interplanetary. Some very likely were interstellar. They even concluded that some of them could be intergalactic. When I retired in 1976, many of our military people knew at that point that we were not simply dealing with visitations from people from other planets or star systems. They had concluded by '76 that some of these visitors very well might be multidimensional in their source. The evidence that we had collected and the evidence that they had repeatedly demonstrated to us, and that's no accident. It became very clear after a time that there was a program or a process of some kind underway, that they had demonstrated over and over and over again that they apparently were able to manipulate matter and time. Now this really shook up our scientists. There are a lot of new young scientists in particle physics today who talk about multiple dimensions. There's a brilliant young professor in New York by the name of Michio Kaku, who has written a brilliant book called Hyperspace, where they talk about 10 separate dimensions. I'm not enough of a physicist to try to explain to you what a dimension is, but the idea that there could be intelligences from somewhere else, from other dimensions, coming and going into our reality. It's been quite a shake-up in traditional science. I guess I speak out openly and bluntly about this because I feel so strongly about it. I violate my security oath every time I speak about it. I do it intentionally and I do it on purpose, because I feel so strongly that the American people not only have a right to know the truth, but they have a need to know the truth. The truth, Don, apparently is simply this, that we're not alone, we've never been alone. We are apparently part of an infinite universe filled with intelligent life. I find that exciting. It doesn't frighten me. The SHAPE study concluded in '64 that if they, whoever they were malevolent or hostile, that they could have taken this planet and cleaned it up and eliminated us, turned us into dog food or whatever, a long, long time ago. That the historical evidence indicates that they've been with us a long time, and I've concluded that we had what I like to call an intimate interrelationship with at least one of those groups, the group that looks exactly like we do. And that point is, I don't like the word alien. I don't think the term alien is appropriate at all here. I like to refer to them as family. We're related to them. I think they had a hand in our being here. And I think the time has come where we're about to meet our extended family. It's going to be very soon. And the people are not ready. And one of the reasons I do speak out so bluntly and so openly is if in some small way I can help people get prepared for this. Because I believe that this reality, once we have accepted it and understood it and gone beyond the fear, will bring about an expansion of consciousness in the human race that will truly help us and prepare us to go out there and take our rightful place in that infinite community of life.
Erwin Schrödinger, who was the father of quantum mechanics and particle wave theory stated 100 years ago or so that the total number of minds in the universe is one. And in fact, that the consciousness is a singularity, phasing within all beings. And this is also the heart of compassion of the Buddha and the source of the oneness spoken of in spirit in all the religious traditions and Native American traditions. And I think that we are going to have to return to a very deep spiritual understanding of what it means to be a conscious being, to be able to not only live on this planet peacefully and not blow each other up over sectarian differences, but also to go into space. Because when you look into the eyes of an extraterrestrial life form, they may be very different from us in many ways, but if you see that that being is conscious, and the light of that conscious spirit is the same as the conscious light within yourself, then you can find some common basis. And so if we understand the single source of the origins of our conscious being, this is true not only for humans, but it's also true, very much true, for these visitors. They understand that, because you cannot travel at multiples of the speed of light without crossing the light barrier. And when you do, you enter into this area that the mystics used to call the etheric, astral, conscious realm. And so you're dealing with civilizations who understand that. And I think that is the big test of our civilization at this time, is that we understand that deeply enough that it really does change our paradigm. And when we do, we're not going to be blowing each other up because of different interpretations of this Bible or this Quran or this religious figure or what have you. That we're going to understand that we really are all one people in the entire cosmos. That universal consciousness and universal understanding, to me, is the thing that will truly transform life on this planet and is the next big leap in human development.
When the children of tomorrow open their textbooks on human history, what will they read about? Will it be the story of how the Catholic Church imprisoned Galileo for supporting radical theories? Will it be the story of how the scientific community laughed at the idea of flying machines, even years after the Wright brothers demonstrated their first airplane? Or will it be the story of how the world openly ignored an extraterrestrial presence? Will the children of tomorrow laugh at us for being blind, just as we easily laugh at those who firmly believed the earth was flat? Will they speak of us as the people of the old world, the last age of solitude, the day before disclosure?